Hello, I'm Kevin Schultz, co-chair of Foley Sports and Entertainment Group, and welcome to the fifth installment in our series, The Comeback: Sports in a Worldwide Pandemic. We hope you were able to make our earlier programs on the business of sports, facility development and redevelopment, facility and event operations, and impacts on brand and asset valuation. And if you weren't able to attend any of those programs live, you can still watch them on demand on our website, foley.com. Today's program is media, digital, broadcast, and an Olympic preview. We have put together a fantastic panel of speakers today, so it promises to be another great discussion. And with that, now I'll hand things over to my fellow co-chair, John Israel, to get the program going. John?
Thank you, Kevin. Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining us today once again for the comeback. For those who don't know me, I am John Israel, as Kevin said. I am a partner in Foley's New York City office, which is one of 21 Foley offices across the US. We have 24 globally, and we have about 1,200 lawyers practicing in a broad range of disciplines that you would expect to find in a general service law firm of that size. And as Kevin said, I co-chair with him Foley and Lardner Sports and Entertainment Group, which is a multidisciplinary team of attorneys with deep and broad experience in the sports and entertainment industry. I myself spent more than 7 years as an in-house lawyer in the NBA league office. Several others in our group have also held leading roles at various professional sports organizations, and given this sort of experience, we like to say that as outside lawyers, our group brings a unique insider's perspective to the work we do for clients in this space. We've really enjoyed bringing you this series as the comeback continues, in some ways roaring back over the past several months, as fans have returned to stadiums and arenas with no capacity limitations, but in many ways still marked by the difficulties of the past year or so with COVID. Some of those difficulties came through so loud and clear during our last program, as we heard from Gary Bettman and Fred Ridley, and they're recounting the challenges of keeping the NHL and the Masters Championships going respectively during COVID. And as Kevin said, you can go back and see all our programming at foley.com. But here we are. Fans can be back, but are they coming back? Attendance, currently in the various sports that are alive now, it varies in some ways, as it always has, from sport to sport, location to location, team to team. I think time will tell as organizations continue to focus on enhancing the live event experience to bring more fans to stadiums and arenas, and to keep them there and to keep them coming back. And I think those efforts, may now permanently be colored by the collective experience with COVID-19. As I said, we've looked at those issues in our earlier comeback program on venues, but today we're going to turn our attention to media, digital, and broadcast with our take or two on the approaching Olympics. And, what has been the impact of these means of content delivery to fans during the pandemic, and what is the impact going forward? Arguably the comeback started immediately, I think, in some ways, even as all the active leagues were shutting down as things started with the virus. And really, TV and internet were the conduit for the comeback. They were the only means of connection and access for leagues, teams, and players on one hand, and fans on the other. And there were predictions back then rolling in that this was, the end of the live event experience for many people, and the sole reliance on these video and digital mediums, forced by the pandemic, would change things forever. And here's COVID again as an accelerant. Would everybody be moving more quickly to the inevitable transition to the consumption of events through screens rather than in person? Well, clearly today the live experience is back, and any of those concerns seem to be overstated, but I don't think there's any overstating the importance of TV and internet. I can still recall the sort of incredible and widespread anticipation for those Bundesliga games, which were played in empty stadiums in May 2020 and broadcast to the world. They were the first European soccer league to resume play. And I think at that time they recorded record TV ratings with their first comeback. So in those early days of the pandemic, industries that were more adept or advanced in digital could more easily pivot. And esports, which I think we're going to be talking about today too, was a great example. It does rely on significant, impactful live events, but it's built on video and digital and an already existing online ecosystem to keep things going. And when everything shut down, we did a series of Zoom calls with industry clients and friends, and we kept the groups pretty small, and we broke them down into segments: venues, consumer products, league and team council, among others. And we did an esports group that was really interesting. I mean, we were on with them for about 2 hours, open forum. It was a really lively discussion about all the things they were doing in the online world and with streaming platforms while everybody was suffering under the pandemic. And frankly, I'm not sure anyone even mentioned COVID-19 during the first 30 minutes of that conversation. It was really enlightening and different. And it really is crazy how much the consumption of sports through screens has changed in the recent decades. I remember watching the 1978 World Cup, which was only available through closed circuit TV at the LA Sports Arena, which no longer exists. But today I can, whenever I want, watch a club soccer game from any division in any country from around the world. And it's not just soccer, it's other sports, including those like rugby and curling that never before would have had access to any sort of expansive broadcast or digital network. And of course, it's no longer just about broadcasting games. When I think back to my days at the NBA, as I watched David Stern and my attorney colleagues cobble together TV and all sorts of other digital and media rights into a package to sell to broadcasters, I can see now how they were ahead of their time in some ways. And with progress and innovation, this all continues. And I see my colleagues today working on concept at Foley, working on comprehensive media rights and content deals that contemplate all forms of digital content, including the latest, NFTs. So the future is there. And the question now is, what is the future for media, broadcast, and digital? What of its ubiquitous nature? Is everything changing? Can digital supplant the live experience? Has it already in so many ways? Are we seeing gradual convergence of traditional sports broadcasting on one hand and the 24/7 streaming experience of esports and video gaming? Will we see the next LeBron James live streaming to his zillions of followers from his kitchen table on Twitch while eating breakfast and talking about last night's game or the latest viral TikTok video? Is that the future? And in what ways has the pandemic altered how any of these questions is answered? So lots of questions, lots to consider. Fortunately, with us today, we have our knowledgeable and experienced guests who will have meaningful insights for sure, if not all of the answers. And for that, again, we thank you all for being here. And I'm pleased to turn the program over to dive into these topics. Rick Horrow, sports media personality, author of many books, and a friend and trusted advisor to Foley's Sports and Entertainment Group, who will run us through our program. Rick?
John, really appreciate it, and I'll provide the 20,000-foot questions. The people who follow me will provide all of the answers, to be sure. But it's an incredible opportunity to look at where media has gone and where it's going, and talk about one of the biggest events that will define the next few years, the Tokyo 2020 Olympics next week in 2021 and beyond. But I don't know if we knew this, but July 4th, 100 years ago, effectively in many ways celebrated the birth of sports media. Jack Dempsey knocked out Frenchman Georges Carpentier, George, in Jersey City. And it was the first boxing multi-million-dollar match, but also, and more importantly, the first sporting event that was broadcast via radio, reaching about 200,000 listeners across 125,000 square miles. The quick history was that Pittsburgh's KDKA got a commercial broadcasting license because they applied to air the results of the Harding versus Cox presidential election, and they slipped in a little boxing match to test, and the highly anticipated bout became significant, a revenue producer, and some would say the birth of sports media, some would say the birth of Stephen A. Smith and others, but we'll kind of leave it at that. And over the last 100 years, we've had traditional media carry the day. I'm here in Denver, the land of the All-Star game, but in many ways, the land of 50 108p HDR cameras for last night's game in the Home Run Derby, 75 microphones, and 2 Megalodon cameras. I looked around yesterday, and they're not shaped or look like Megalodons, I think. If they are, they weren't there. But when you think about what they show and how expensive it is, the All-Star Weekend has come not just to a game, but the Futures game, the High School All-American game, the draft, the Home Run Derby, the final press conferences. It's all integrated, and I know our guests will talk about how they deal with those in their respective sports. We also have the unique crossover. Who'd have thought that coming up in 2 weeks, not only the Olympics, which is really important, but right now, the beginning of Shark Week. And not only is that an important event to keep surfers out of the water, but it's a really important event for discovery. Geico, T-Mobile, and you look at the advertisers, it is a clear cross between sports and entertainment. You have unique new asset classes. You know, when you look at NIL and NIL's evolution, we don't have enough time to talk about that today, but we will scratch the surface by saying, for example, that one of the side benefits from NIL in the future will be the empowerment of female athletes that we haven't had before. For example, you go to Times Square today, you see a life-size mural of Harley and Hannah Cavender, who are the twins who are the media and social media sensations, but can now share money because of NIL. And between 2017 and 2020, I know one of our guests knows these well, the number of sponsorship deals for female athletes in the US increased by 31%, with each deal increasing approximately 65% in value, according to Nielsen Sports. Bottom line of that is not just because we now have new platforms, but because people are aware of them as well. You have crypto, which another of our guests will talk about specifically as well. We have Tom Brady with a major crypto deal. We have the UFC just signing a deal with Crypto.com. We have a $135 million arena naming deal with FTX, which we would have never thought about before, but those companies have money to invest huge future guaranteed dollars into the naming of facilities and the naming of events. And I'm sure we're all paying very careful attention to how that's happening. We have streaming. Who'd have thought that every game of the WUSL and every minute of the National Spelling Bee and every minute of the National Cornhole Championship would be available for us, in addition to the fact that going from one end of the spectrum to the other one, which is Redbird's SPAC that Billy Beane is involved in, is taking a piece of a $4.5 billion cricket asset under management, because now cricket not only is Indians or South Africans or Australians or Pakistan's event, but because of the way media is, it's our event as well. But we're going to an Olympics where $820 million is off the table. Why? Because those are ticket revenues that aren't available. And so if no media, if no social media, if no digital, then no Olympics. So the tie-in is obvious. We have world-class guests to talk about vertical integration among hundreds of properties. And Zach Leonces, who is Executive Vice President of Monumental Sports and Entertainment, but so much more. Talk about that. Phil DiPicciotto, the founder of Octagon, talking about all of that relative to the Olympics. Then completely segueing into the Olympics, Alec Kelter, who statistically, and it's not just subjective, statistically, she is the top female rugby player in the world, leading the U.S. Rugby Sevens Olympic team to hopefully certain glory in Tokyo. She's there right now, but she's going to be part of this whole event talking about the Olympic experience. So great setting, great event, great guests. And without further ado, I hope I didn't violate my Bob Dupé run on time. We will introduce our guests. Zach Leonces, Senior Vice President of Strategic Initiatives, Monumental Sports and Entertainment. I fear if I go through the whole bio, we won't have any time left. And I'm not stealing his thunder. I just will tell you that he is one of the foremost entrepreneurs in the modern world. And when you listen to all of the events that he touches, you get a sense that if you ever wanted to have someone talk about vertical integration with media, properties, facilities, and events, you would talk to Zach. So is that a good enough introduction, or you want me to get specific?
Yeah, Rick, you're a real comedian. Nicely done, though. I appreciate the kind words. I think the best accolade is having written a chapter in one of your books. So how's the book doing, by the way? It's
doing really well. And by the way, thank you for asking, because we're going to reissue it post-pandemic, and we're going to get another series of advice on how the industry happens over 50 years, but what's happening in the future. And I thank you for asking that question. That was not rehearsed. So, but the one thing that we usually do when we do these interviews is I usually put you on the spot, but you're ahead of me on that. Rather than read the assets that you control, we're going to put you on the clock. We're going to give you 45 seconds because you have 15 seconds more assets than the 30 seconds I gave you before. All the assets you touch, influence, or control. Go.
Okay. Our company, Monumental Sports and Entertainment, is best known as being a fully integrated professional sports operator. We own teams like the Washington Capitals in the NHL, the Washington Wizards in the NBA, the Mystics in the WNBA, a G League team called the Capital City Go-Go, a 2K League team called Wizard District Gaming. We operate Capital One Arena, Eagle Bank Arena, MedStar Wizards Performance Center, our practice facility for the Wizards, MedStar Capitals Iceplex, our practice facility for the Capitals. We are an equity partner in NBC Sports Washington. We have an OTT streaming network called Monumental Sports Network, and we own one of the largest esport teams in the world called Team Liquid, amongst other things.
Amongst other things, there's the tag along. I'm looking to see if you missed any, but it's the point is, it all feeds off of everything else. So if you were to describe the strategic benefits of owning or influencing pieces of all of those, what, other than the obvious words of vertical integration, what does it really mean, and how does it give you a jump in the business?
I think something that is becoming clear, and something that we believed in for a little while now, is that scale matters. Scale matters when it comes to efficiencies on the expense side, featuring shared services across, the non-sexy functions of a normal, typical organization, HR, finance, accounting, but also the really exciting components of it too, business intelligence, database management. And even though we're not a national organization, we feature a sizable local database of, millions of names, hundreds of thousands of credit cards, very carefully crafted information that we can obviously use to better market and better inform ourselves on what products and services we might be best suited to launch in the future. I think we also think about Monumental Sports Entertainment as a platform that we can hang or launch additional apps off of. We leverage our fully integrated corporate partnerships team to sell assets across the entire inventory of properties. That scale, I think you're going to see growing in other markets with other properties. We want to become super regionals, and we think one of our strategic advantages is that we are in one of the wealthiest, most highly wired, youngest and most important communities in the entire country, and that's Washington, D.C. and the greater Mid-Atlantic region. So we think of ourselves as D.C.'s biggest cheerleaders, and as much as we can, we want to propel our company forward to field great teams and then do good in our neighborhood, be a great double bottom line exemplar business.
We'll return back to the whole media vertical integration piece, but let's talk about the pandemic for a minute. It is great that we're sitting here with the prospect of full return. It's been in many ways ancient history when sports shut down on March 11 of 2020. On the other hand, we're back. So give me your general thoughts about how you, as a vertically integrated entity, have gotten through the pandemic and where you're going right after it.
Well, I think we've thought about the pandemic as a 1,000-day episode, a 1,000-day chapter in our lives. And a lot of people out there think the pandemic is over. Clearly, when we're talking about the comeback is well underway, but the comeback isn't complete. And so I think management is likely conservatively budgeting for the next 12 months or so, but hoping for the best. I know a couple of people who are on boards of major casino properties who have said that they're preparing for a redux of the roaring 20s. And I feel that sentiment. When we were having limited capacity crowds in our building, people were happy to be there. People were compliant with the rules and regulations and the safety standards that we've installed and that our leagues have carefully crafted. We feel really confident about coming back in the fall at 100% capacity with or without a mask mandate. I think that still remains to be seen based on what the leagues issue and based on what local jurisdictions issue. But clearly what we've learned through the pandemic is that bricks really are out and clicks are in. We knew this from before. It's why we've tracked a lot of different theses out there, cord cutting and cord shaving, leading to a symbiotic universe with DTC and streaming components. I think that's going to definitely materialize in the next 2 to 3 years with a lot of the biggest cable partners in the RSN world. It's already happening with national networks. You see ESPN Plus, DAZN, and the like. The rise of NFTs, cryptocurrency, you touched on that. IP owners really taking ownership of their property, minting very unique, scarce digital currencies that can be traded in the secondary market and still benefit the IP owner. The rise of esports, of property where digital will always be first and linear will be the secondary distribution channel. I think esports had an exciting opportunity before the pandemic and now has been accelerated arguably 3 to 5 years into the future. And we've seen that with the properties that we operate. And then the rise of sports betting. Sports betting has been rolling out at a faster pace than originally anticipated because local legislators know that this is a great way to drive new tax revenue. And we announced about a year ago that we would be the first arena in all of sports to have a sports book within our 4 walls. And we have happily opened that facility. It's spectacular. And we welcome you all to come visit it sometime next time you're in Washington, D.C.
There are so many things to, as people say these days, unpack out of that. We don't have enough time, but let's take some of the highlights. Let's start first with the gaming issue. You think it's ahead of schedule if you put your crystal ball to the quick reaction after the Supreme Court decision of a couple of years ago, and then the number of states that allowed, and then your reaction as team owners and property owners to take advantage of all that quickly, not only on the mobile side, but on the physical asset side. Are we on schedule roughly, and how quickly do we keep going with that on the gaming side of this?
I think sports betting is rolled out at an appropriate pace, but like any new initiative, there are bumps in the road and lots of opportunity that potentially remains. One of the challenges with the repeal of PASPA was that it allowed states to make their own rules and legislation. And so it is difficult for a consumer, particularly living in a tri-state area like we do, Virginia, Maryland, Washington, D.C., to figure out what they can do when they cross the border and what they can do in their own state. Mobile betting rules vary, physical locations vary, types of betting opportunities and sports that you can bet on vary. The D.C. legislation is challenged in that the mobile betting rules are very restricted. But the physical in-person experience that we have at Capital One Arena in conjunction with Caesar Sports is fantastic, and we're able to offer very competitive odds that you would find anywhere else on a national basis. I think that the U.S. sports bettor itself, while deeply interested in gamifying their experience, putting a little bit of skin in the game, is still learning about the different products that they can potentially purchase and participate in sportsbook. And we see that because we're very familiar with the European markets. The European markets, for example, are dominated by in-play or real-time prop betting opportunities as opposed to pre-game or futures. In the United States, that has begun to shift, but we are still a majority on the money line and pre-game opportunities. We haven't really fully seen an integration with media yet. We've seen some networks start to tease odds and tease sports betting experiences and original programs and the like. I think we are going to start to see more and more alternate betting specific feeds. And I think the big challenge for digital streamers is when can you get premium live sports rights experiences in context in a one window experience with live betting? And can you make a bundle around that opportunity too? I think there's a lot of untapped potential. I think there's still a lot of education happening in the marketplace. But for the most part, things are definitely trending in the right direction for the industry and for the American consumer.
Well, here's a person who, with his dad, wrote in this book that if you are not building your websites to be mobile and social first, you're missing a huge opportunity. So the website is a vertical integrating thing. This was written 2 years ago. Everybody seems to be catching on. Are you tired of coming up with all this stuff that everybody is copying around the world?
I don't think I'm coming up with the stuff. I think I'm stealing it from others who are pioneers, and I'm just trying to listen and follow along. But clearly, you do need to be mobile first. There are way more mobile phones out there than laptop computers or desktop computers and whatnot. And frankly, now I think we more feel like our team's web page experience are our social accounts, right? That's really primarily where we're getting information out to our fans and where we're deeply having engagement and embracing their fandom. And it was a huge challenge for us during the pandemic. Typically, when people are coming into our building, we can see them in person, we can embrace them. We have great direct relationships with our season ticket members. We were obviously disconnected for a long period of time, and you leverage Zoom, you leverage Teams. Really, we got to try to create branded pieces of programming. We have to create behind the scenes access. We have to make our players accessible to our fans to maintain that bond during this period of isolation. So it was great to finally get fans back in our building, and we can't wait for the fall when we can have full houses again.
Well, that's a great comment too, but also you have a leadership position in what 5 years ago people wouldn't consider a sport, but now it's destined probably to be an Olympic sport. Talk about your new 2K League team, the Wizard District Gaming, all of the issues that you have are driving around esports. Will esports continue its gigantic trend now and in the near future, and predict Olympic sportdom over time?
Yeah, I think without a doubt. I think the first thing that interested us about esports was, we heard it had sold out an arena. That doesn't happen often yet, but the media viewership component for esports really is tremendous, and it's happening on a global basis. These are team brands that have global relevance. Our esports team, Team Liquid, for example, competes across 15 different video game titles, 15 different games. They've got 80 different athletes, and some of the teams and some of the leagues are highly relevant in North America, others in Brazil, Russia, the UK, South Korea, China. They have headquarters and practice facilities in Los Angeles as well as Amsterdam. They plan to open more in the future. We're considering building something in the not too distant future in DC as well. And so, as a traditional sports operator and property who has a significant chunk of revenues coming from the linear distribution world, we really had to think hard about what's going on here and how do you make a business with a lot of eyeballs all around streaming and upselling these unorthodox subscriber packages that are featuring items like enhanced keyboard functionality and shout outs from your favorite streamer. It's a very different value proposition than what traditional sports fans are seeing. And esports fans, for the most part, aren't traditional sports fans. And so we just felt simply like if we didn't have a seat at that table, we could miss out on an entire generation of fandom. So we've learned a lot from esports, and I think that esports continues to learn a lot from the traditional sports world as well.
My final question is probably imponderable and unanswerable, but we'll do it anyway. You have three wild west issues that you are on the forefront of. You got esport, you got gaming, you got NFTs, and you talk about that whole crypto NFT world. How do you manage your vertically integrated traditional businesses against the maybe more significant upside, but significant risk attached to it, areas of these three wild west components? You've got one big vertically integrated world, but you got a whole bunch of components. How do you juggle not only each asset, but how do you juggle the whole risk reward equation?
I think we are entrepreneurs at heart. We enjoy venture capital. We enjoy the challenge of growing properties from 5 million to 10 million to 50 million to 100 million. That's where we find enjoyment and satisfaction. And so I think that may be personal to us, but there are lots of people who like challenges in growing things. We think of the Capitals, Wizards, Capital One Arena, or RSN as core properties that we want to continue to grow at a clip of 10% year over year. It's these smaller opportunities that are growing at more explosive rates. When we first invested into Team Liquid, the team was valued at $10 million. We're going to go out and try to raise capital at somewhere over $350 million. And that's only in the span of 5 years. So a lot of value can be created if you're willing to take a risk and try to be first or be one of the first. And we certainly don't ever, maybe it's just we have FOMO, Rick. We don't want to get left behind. We want to be part of the cool new thing. And, we make mistakes too. Not everything works out, but we've had some great wins along the way that we're enjoying.
One of the many incredible features and traits of Zach Leonces is his humility. Yeah, you know what? A lot of other people do this, but nowhere like you guys do. And I'm honored to have you share this information, honored to have you be a friend, and thank you very much for doing this. Really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me, Rick, and thanks to Foley as well.
Phil DiPicciotto, the founder of Octagon, and he has been at the forefront of the sports entertainment industry for well over 35 years. Let's say over 35 years. They are the leadership entity in talent and representation, vertically integrated stuff, global vision. Vertically integrated stuff broadly defines what you guys do because, like Zach in his world, you're one step ahead of the trends as it relates to the athlete and event side of the business, but touch all of the issues that Zach did and does from your perspective as well. Again, happy to have you involved in all aspects of what we're trying to do, and thank you for your time.
Thanks very much for including me today.
You've been, again, at the forefront of entertainment for many of these years, and you've seen how globalization has permeated all aspects of the business. But now that we are up against it, we're no longer talking about the 2020 Olympics in a distant dream. It's less than 10 days away. And how important will that event, in your estimation, be in redefining how the post-pandemic world conducts business?
Well, Rick, as you know, the Olympics are a massive undertaking, even in the best of times. It's 17 days, multiple events, multiple venues, multiple stagings with award ceremonies and opening and closing ceremonies, among others. And it's really destination television. There's a huge viewership, both domestically here and around the world, and that creates a shared experience. It's like one of those old TV series where on a Monday, people would hang around the water cooler at offices and talk about it in a shared way because so many people had seen it. but it's highly, highly complicated to stage the Olympic Games. Even though it's largely a made-for-media event, I shouldn't say just TV, also streaming, of course, and available on every device, almost every minute, or probably every minute of every event in most, if not every place around the world. You know, one still has to consider the time differences, national preferences for what viewers want to watch in a particular region, and more. And then, you know, the postponement has had an enormous effect on logistics, on corporate activations, on networking and business development opportunities. You know, not to mention that the next games, the Winter Games, are going to be back just a few months ahead, and there'll be a total of 5 Olympic Games in a period of 8 years. So the world is too complicated, I think, and the games are too unique to say that they can redefine a market just due to their operating complexity, their scale, and their cost. But I do think that there are learnings from these games and the run-up to the games, certainly with regard to risk management and risk assessment years out and globally. There will be differences in how deals are negotiated and what the terms on a business basis ultimately are. I think that there's more shared concern over athlete health, and now on top of that, spectator health and community health. And I would say that, you know, the world needs to coordinate better in a lot of ways, and the Olympic Games, especially these games, are a very instructive lesson in the importance of coordination.
Before we get back to how Octagon has managed its way through the pandemic, obviously very successfully, but since we're close to the Olympics, you know, you wrote in the handbook that those at the high end of the global performance platform have the opportunity to build their own brands using social media and the conversation around sports to create the value beyond their own brands and the pitch. Did the pandemic increase or decrease these opportunities? And will the Olympics strengthen the athlete spokesman business as we know it? You know, that's a very important issue, and you know, let me know what you think about how the Olympics going into it are going to impact the brands of your athletes that you represent.
Well, as you know, consistent with the timing of the run-up to the Olympics, we now have these new opportunities for student athletes. So the real amateurs, I would say, even though there are a lot of amateurs in the Olympic Games as well. So the market of opportunities for athletes in general, I think, clearly has expanded. The Olympics aren't directly responsible for the student athlete piece of that equation, but it's worth factoring in. But for any athlete, it's really ultimately about performance. So when a global platform is no longer there, or no longer there on the timing that it's anticipated to be there, then you have to create a different platform just to remain relevant and to create awareness. And that marketplace is filled by a lot of people, not just athletes. You know, when you remove the live performance and the ability for an athlete to showcase his or her skills, he or she is now playing in the digital universe of all kinds of influencers in many different areas. And one unique element of sport is that the best in class often compete against each other, and the outcome of their performances are very objectively determined, as opposed to other areas of influence or pockets of influence where largely the viewership is allowed to give subjective judgments as to what they like or not. So I would say that without competition, athletes as a whole are generally disadvantaged. So the COVID period, I would say, was generally unhelpful to them in terms of their ability to build and sustain audiences without their existing competition platforms. But digital experiences were enhanced. There was a lot of innovation. Some new kinds of opportunities were created. There were winners and losers. There just wasn't enough room in that space to fill in all the gaps that were created by the lack of competition.
So let's talk about those gaps, knowing competition is coming back and knowing we're going to have winners and losers after the Olympics. But part of the job is to minimize the loss, because losers of a gold medal doesn't mean losers of the opportunity to capitalize on awareness, on business, on social media and the like. Are we also saying that because social media is so pervasive these days, and hopefully Madison Avenue is beginning to catch up, requires them to do a little work, but beginning to catch up, that there may be more opportunities for Olympic athletes and other athletes in the lesser known sports after the Olympics, because the platforms may be more available and we may be better able to monetize?
You know, everything at the end of the day comes back to supply and demand, and the more unique you can make the supply, maybe the more specific, but also the more valuable becomes the demand. So there will certainly be stars that come out of these Olympic Games, just as there are from other games before. And some of them will be the predicted stars, and some will be new names who have, performers who have been exceptional for a long time, but just may not, as you said, have had that visibility platform. So certainly, again, there will be opportunities. The question is sustainability. You know, with all sports coming back, there's a lot of supply coming back into the market. And those who have this live platform to be able to enhance the digital aspects, I think, are going to have an advantage. And again, there's going to be a whole new set of Olympians in the Winter Games coming up right on the heels, of these Summer Games. So I think that there are great opportunities for some of the athletes coming out of these games, but also the window could be very short.
You've also talked from the brand perspective about international and global companies looking to strengthen their presence in newer growing territories, or using assets in foreign markets to reach a TV audience, quote unquote, back home. Spoke about this in the context of Chinese and Japanese companies, but it's a broader perspective than that. I assume the Olympics will have a profound effect on this issue as well.
The next two games are coincidentally, or maybe not, in Japan and in China, of course. And Olympic partnerships are very expensive, and these partnerships are able to create and extract value only with full integration, when all of the benefits are usable by the partners who have bought into an ecosystem, essentially. And that goes, business to consumer, business to business, business to government, government to government, the media platforms, and more. So the value proposition changes dramatically when the games change. And these games are so different in so many ways that my suspicion is that a lot of the brands are going to have applied enormous foresight and creativity to shifting how they extract value. And some of them, just because of the nature of their product or service, probably are not going to be able to do that.
So the survival of the fittest has a lot of manifestations across the board, not just Olympic or internationally. So let's talk about Octagon for a minute. You've achieved an unquestioned position of leadership in talent representation, property management, event management, corporate marketing, while maintaining a consistent high quality of work. How you sustained the business over time, especially through the pandemic? It's a very interesting case study. Tell us about it.
It's all about people. We've never created a role from a box on an org chart. We've always done it around people, and we've just stuck to our values and our beliefs. We've always had to operate on a landscape of uncertainty. An athlete is only one play or game away from an injury or a retirement. There are all kinds of twists and turns that go into managing an event or a brand partnership or a government relationship or a media relationship. So there was more uncertainty for more people at a higher and deeper level during COVID than there was before. But I think we're quite comfortable navigating in that area. We also have no debt, which was very helpful to us, especially, planning for the eventuality that there may have been a more difficult marketplace at some time. I think had paid off, even though we, of course, wish it never had come to that. And we didn't change the things that we do or the philosophy with which we do it. So, any business, pandemic related or not, really has to rely on the expertise of their people. We get hired because we can help others get to someplace they want to go, and they can't do it as effectively or efficiently on their own. So the expertise did not change. The commitment to being responsive and prompt and consistent and accurate for us did not change. The passion with which we did our jobs didn't change. And we're highly collaborative. We like to align stakeholders. We feel that the win-lose world should be on the playing field. It should not be what we subscribe to as a business. And so we like each other, and we like what we do, and we're committed to helping other people. So, fortunately, we were able to continue to do all of that during the COVID year behind us.
A great comment relative to you're committed to helping other people. Philanthropy and sponsorship have been at the forefront of your messaging for many years, you personally and the firm. It includes the removal of tobacco sponsorship from professional tennis, the introduction of healthier drinks into New York City's public schools, and on and on. Is this now more or less important after the pandemic?
I think we have faced and we are facing, multiple pandemics, and that really maybe goes to the heart of your question. The first is clearly a health and COVID pandemic. The second is maybe a societal pandemic with social and racial justice at the forefront, and those all led to a set of financial disparities that are more pronounced than maybe at any other time, certainly in my working career. And there are lots of connecting points between and among all of those. So, with health and with justice and with philanthropy, it's really about balancing the world's interests, trying to do what each person individually feels is right. And hopefully there's a kind of moral underpinning or understanding where most of the world can agree on the things that are right, and then balancing them short-term and long-term, making sure that the business is effective enough that you can remain there as a leading platform for long enough to accomplish those things that you want, because societal goals usually have catalysts, but they take, a long time to implement more thoroughly and broadly through society. So I think in the past, before these pandemics, these issues tended to be more individualized, more siloed, and this confluence of pandemics has brought them all together, which means that I think we're all more aware as a world that everything connects to everything else, and it's made philanthropy, I think, more important than ever.
Final question, easy question for you. Give us your prediction of where the sports business is going in the near and long term. 5 years from now, where is the sports business generally?
Well, I think, Rick, if that question is easy, it's because I have no clue. But I do think that there are some indicators that we might all want to keep our eyes on. So maybe we start by going back to basics, which is that sports is and has always been a microcosm of the world. There are the same issues and the same opportunities reflected in and by sports as in the larger society. So sports specifically, I think the key for its being able to thrive in the future is being able to stay connected to its fan base. Those who play, either growing up or as adults, those who attend live events, so we all need live events to return, and those who watch. And there has historically been a connection among all three of those. Those audiences will change a little bit, be enhanced in some ways, be diminished in some ways based on sports gambling and some of the other newer reasons, I would say, to pay attention to sport. But we all, owners and players, corporations, governments, we all have roles, and we have to recognize that the bookends of society are also the bookends within sport and reflected by sport. So there are going to be the haves and have-nots, which is ticket pricing and affordability of going to games. Within the player community, it's salaries at the high end and at the low end that have to be managed or considered properly. Sports is uniquely meritocratic. So if one is good enough, generally one will have the opportunity to play. That does not mean that anybody knows who's going to win. That's why we all watch. That's why the social conversation is so strong and so valuable around sports. And sports is made for technology. It's got a global reach now. There's freedom of player movement, freedom of fan movement. There are natural health imaging components to it. Sports can't be time shifted, so we might actually be doing the same thing as each other at the same time with the same level of interest, which is not common in a world that's becoming more nichified, I would say, if that's a word. So at the end of the day, those of us who work in sports, I think, are very fortunate because we can be leaders in accelerating or adopting the trends in the world.
A very difficult question, wasn't easy, but an incredible answer, typically incredible answer. Phil, I really do appreciate your time and always count on your insights and continue to be inspired. Thank you very much.
Well, many thanks to you and to Foley.
Appreciate it. If we're talking about Olympic athletes, we're clearly saving the best for last. Alec Kelter is her bio says she's a women's professional rugby sevens player headed to Tokyo, but she's so much more. We described her credentials when we did this interview a couple of days ago, so you'll hear it in a minute. And just remember the story. She was committed for this normal time slot, but the U.S. Olympic rugby group had the audacity to pull the plug a couple of days early and said, get out of town, you've got more protocols you got to deal with. So right after a practice, she did her piece in the car, which talks about her commitment, her loyalty, and her satisfaction of this promise. So you ought to be able to get some really specific ideas on what Alec is all about, what challenges she faces, what the business of being an Olympic athlete is at the end of the day, a successful one as well. And so I give you Alec Kelter. She's a good friend, and she has not too much pressure, but the hopes of the U.S. Rugby Sevens Olympic team on her shoulders. She's born in Eagle River, Alaska, second Olympics, Brazil 2016. She played hockey, soccer, and rugby at Wisconsin. She was on the U.S. national under-20 soccer team and the U.S. women's under-18 hockey team. And if that wasn't enough, she graduated Wisconsin in fine arts. Her dad was a fighter pilot, which explains why they moved 4 times before her age of 9. But it also explains the incredible perspective she's got. And she, by the way, is sweaty. I don't need you to tell me that. But she's in the car to practice today, heading to the Olympics to Tokyo tomorrow. Thanks for wedging us in, and we're really happy to have you. Thanks.
Thanks, Rick. Honored to be here.
Yeah, well, I really, really appreciate it. So, look, first of all, before anybody talks about the Olympics and rugby, I snapshotted your background, but your background is incredible. It's perspective. You had a choice to choose a lot of sports. You also are an incredible business person, which is why we're mixing this into other things as well. When did you decide how important it was to use the platform of sports to help your business?
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great question. For me, using the platform, sports platform, you can reach millions of people. And for me, just using sport to inspire young children to get out and play every day, but also to use it to encourage, everyone on every platform to be confident, to be disciplined, to follow their passions. It's helped me in every aspect of my life. And just transitioning from sports to business, it's a natural transition for me.
If I had to, I know your first and middle name and last name, but if I had to pick a middle name, it would be keep your options open. It's a long name, but the bottom line was you went to Wisconsin and you had to pick. So why hockey originally? Why soccer? And why did you end up with rugby?
That's a great question. When I was in Alaska and growing up, I played 6 different sports, Rick, and I fell in love, super passionate about ice hockey and soccer. And everyone said you need to specialize, you need to just do one sport. And I was afraid of that burnout. And I decided, made a pact when I was 14, I'm going to try to play both soccer and hockey as long as I can. And that's, I played 2 Division I sports, and then when one door closed, another door opened, and I wasn't afraid to take that risk and jump into rugby. And yeah, blessed to have that decision.
Well, you jumped into rugby at a time when the world had jumped into rugby well before that. There's a lot of history and tradition, and the United States is long on desire and long on population, and not a whole lot of history and not a whole lot of tradition. That was just one of the other challenges you've had to overcome, I guess.
Yes, absolutely. Rugby, it's not super popular in America, but I think 43 million people watched our semifinal game in Rio, and it's just a matter of time that we're going to show the world what a gold medal team looks like, and excited for that in Tokyo.
Well, the matter of time is about 7 minutes from now when we ask you for that guarantee, so you better start listening. Okay? So give us an example, or give us the snapshot of what it was like on the off again, on again training last year. You lived it. I kind of heard about it through you, of being able to talk about a 2020, go to Tokyo, then 2021, back for 2020. You may or may not bring family. You may or may not go to the opening and closing. And now the rules change at the last minute. Got to be frustrating. Got to be difficult.
Yeah, Rick, when we were in 3 months out from the pinnacle of our sport, the world's biggest stage, and it was devastating to hear that it was pushed back another year. And we went from, peak conditioning to taking the summer off, basically taking 5 months off to rest, so then we can just hit back, in full stride, and then go back into preseason and then start building again. And, that mentally, doing that alone, I don't think I've done the last 20 something years I've been playing, professional sports. And again, it was completely devastating. But what was so beautiful about our team in particular is that we trained for this. We trained for being adaptable, for being flexible. And we looked at each other and we said, okay, let's not look at ourselves and woe is me, but let's turn outward and focus on our community and how can we help each other. And that's what it took, was leaning on each other to get through that pandemic. But man, training hard alone on an assault bike for 4 months, just, definitely went to some dark places for sure.
I know you well enough to say this, and you'll appreciate it. You don't operate well alone. You need people.
I'm a twin. I literally have someone in the womb with
you
me.
You need positive reinforcement to live, obviously. So talk about preparing for Tokyo while launching what will be inevitably a successful business career. I know we've had conversations about it, and you have an intuition for business that few people do. But yet, candidly, you're in a sport where the zeros don't add up yet. So how do you maneuver that? You look for the long term, I guess, and you got to be the best you can be.
Absolutely. Yeah. And you continue to keep growing, keep learning. While we had a lot of downtime, the internet was working and phone calls are still available, and, getting ready to, transition, maybe not next year or after, maybe after Paris, I'll start to transition, Rick. And, but, getting those relationships built and hard conversations happening now, and also growing your platform. It's for me, it's signing with Octagon Agency was like, for me, an amazing, pinnacle moment for my life and my career. And then also, talking to you and talking to, a lot of amazing business people. You had spoken to Angela Ruggiero, learning about how they transition successfully, what their passions are, how can I fit into the sports and business world, looking at being an analyst, looking at being a sideline reporter. What is it I'm passionate about? So dipping my toe in it during the pandemic was really fun to just kind of have a low risk, low profile taste of what it's like.
We're one question away from the big G guarantee question, so you have 30 seconds to rehearse the answer. But so whatever happens this year, and I know it's going to happen, then you have 4 more years. Your personal timetable is to kick ass in Paris, and then spend the next 4 years, now 3, kind of developing a life after on the field and figure out how that all comes together?
Absolutely. For me, the goal is to focus on, rugby and winning a gold medal and this team. I think previous years Olympic, platforms were available. I wasn't necessarily the best team player. I thought about statistics and my plus minus stats and, where I am in ranks, from 1 to 30 in the world. But right now, for me, it's the investment in my teammates, the investment in each other, the investment in my community, and completely coming with an outward focus. And if I take that momentum and turn that into the business world, it's going to be, nothing less than successful. So very excited about that.
We've just added coach and mentor to the laundry list of 400,000 things that you're qualified to do. So it's going to be a heck of an off season. So before we ask you, do you remember, are you old enough to remember Joe Namath? Do you know who he is?
I do.
All right, good. So his guarantee was pretty successful because he backed it up when the Jets beat the Dolphins. So are you going to sit here with a whole bunch of very important business people and guarantee a gold medal in the next 3 weeks in Tokyo?
I am. Rick.
Wow.
And I know that because this team has overcome adversity. This team is ready to play under pressure. We are hungry. We are ready. And I know that we have beaten every team on the circuit, including the Aussies, including the Kiwis. And if when we show up, stay present, stay calm, we're going to come home with a gold medal.
There you go, ladies and gentlemen. We heard it here first. Alan, please go take a shower, go get dressed, go do whatever you need to do. And absolutely.
I'm glad I have your permission. Thank you.
Yeah, you got my permission now. Go. So next up, Bob Dupay and I with some closing comments. Thank you all very much. It's been an incredible. We're back in the world. Can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Good. Well, all right. So she's obviously incredible and will be the face of women's rugby, men's rugby, NGBs for many years to come. She's very interested in the boardroom, in business, in development. She's a Wisconsin person. Can't hold that against her, but obviously there are a lot of issues that are really positive. So give me your general perceptions of, the last hour. What's your thought?
I thought, look, she's eternally enthusiastic and talented and will do great. And it was a great finish because what it captured was, she's the future. And when you listen to Phil and listen to Zach, and Zach is the future as well, but there is enormous opportunity remaining. But the pace of change and the pace of technology really does make it a tsunami. And, the ability to stay ahead, for someone like Alec and Zach and Phil to stay ahead, it's great that, Monumental and Octagon have seemed to stay ahead of the curve. But when you listen to the pace of change and what technology can do, there are going to be people who are going to bet and be big winners, and there are people who are going to bet and not be big winners. And I totally agree with Phil that sports is a microcosm of society. And I also agree with his word that society has become more niched, if in fact it is a word. And so guessing which niches are going to control the entertainment dollar and which niches are going to control the sports dollar and how that's going to be all delivered over the next 10, 15, 20 years is going to be an interesting experience. And I hope we've been able to provide some guidance and some guideposts to that future.
Well, a couple more things, and then we'll get people on their way. But you know what I find is interesting as well, and I think we've said this in other ways, and Zach was good at this one. You can't deal with the future risks unless you have a solid foundation grounded in the present. So with Zach's wild west issues, let's call them, you know, the whole gaming, the whole NFT and esport, he's out front on every one, and they're all interrelated, but they're all very complex issues. And I think the reason why he and his dad are is because they have control over two major league teams, a major arena, a relationship with NBC, control of the programming of a regional sports network, and also the digital components of all of those networks. Obviously, access to capital, access to credibility, but I think the ability to deal with these future issues is solidly related to how well you're dealing with the current issues.
Yeah, I think there's no question. You said it much better than I would have. I mean, your introduction, John Israel's introduction. I mean, it's very exciting, and you know, but it also presents. It's scary, and to have the grounding and have the history and to be able to react to this is what we tried, you know, in the linear world, and now how do we bring that to the digital world, and how do we bring that to streaming, and how do we capitalize on that and capitalize on the global audience that provides. You know, everyone thought the internet was something, you know, in the late 90s, and the Google was something. No one understood the pace and the acceleration and what it was going to provide, and the opportunity it was going to provide. And there will be more opportunity like that over the next 20 years as well.
Well, and you take the areas of digital and media and broadcast, and then tied into the Olympics. I'll say it, you don't have to, as a kind of full-time Foley guy that came back. I think Foley is uniquely positioned because of the ability to build a solid foundation. It's not a sports law firm, it's an entertainment, real estate, government practice. I mean, look at all of your diverse practices, the thing that I've noticed, but your solid foundation to tackle areas that otherwise would be difficult to reconcile if you didn't have that solid foundation. Esport, gaming, NFTs, you have whole sections of very sophisticated people who are dealing with only those issues, but drawing from the solid foundation. So, you know, comment on that or talk about that for a minute.
Well, as I've said for a long time to law students who have written or called and said they want to get into sports law. I mean, sports is the subject matter, but sports law really covers the entire spectrum, from finance to contract, as you mentioned, real estate, to labor, to antitrust, to digital, to IP. You know, it really is the application of all of those areas to the specific sport or the specific media venture that's being discussed. So having people that, you know, have worked at the leagues, having people that work at the teams, it's really sort of the same comment you made about Ted and Zach. You know, having that foundation and that background makes it a little bit easier, I think, to pivot and to provide help in those areas.
So we'll say goodbye, everybody. I'm here in Denver, and I just want to tell you, after a very successful All-Star week, the one thing that was clearly missing from everybody here's perspective, they're all saying, "Where was Bob Dupay?" I mean, we really needed Bob Dupay here, and so yeah, I'm sorry. It just they're all breaking out in this crying because Bob Dupay wasn't around. But
yeah, it would have been good had he been the DH rather than Ohtani. But you know,
yeah, but listen, Bob Dupay and Ohtani had one common performance issue here, which was neither one of you had a hit in the All-Star game. So,
exactly.
On that note, ladies and gentlemen, really happy that you were here. We're talking in the future about professional sports management issues. We've got a whole program lined up in the future about the NIL issue, and we've got some other exciting things coming up. So thank you all for joining. We'll speak with you soon.